Good morning. It's Monday, March 6th, 2017. Welcome to our monthly Facebook Live show. Today we're very fortunate to have Mike Uhrhamer, Public Affairs Officer from the Helix Water District. He's been with Helix for a little over 2 years, and prior to that, he was with the Padre Dam Water District for 10 years. Prior to that, he was managing communications events and marketing events for resorts, for the World Pro Surfing Tour, and the Rose Bowl. Mike lives in Del Mar with his wife Lisa and their golden retriever Mogi. Let's give him a big welcome.
Thank you.
Mike, talk to us about what's happening in the world of water and rebates, please.
Okay. And John, thank you for inviting me today. I was really impressed to see that you guys have a golden retriever here in your office. Obviously a great place to work. So I wanted to talk to you guys today, just briefly, give you an update on the drought, and then really focus on legislation and potential impact to Castle Breckenridge. I hope I'm not telling you anything new today, because the legislation picture is a little bit dire, so I hope that maybe your own association has shared some of this information with you already, and that it's you're not hearing it for the first time today. But let's start with the drought. We couldn't be in a better water supply situation than we're in now. I looked at all the new statistics on Friday. Our snowpack in the Sierra, which provides about 30% of the water supply for the state, is at 180% of normal. That's good news. Our major reservoirs are over 100% of normal from March 3rd, and that includes Lake Oroville, which provides the water supply from the northern Sierra for Southern California cities, and Lake Shasta, the largest reservoir in the state, which provides water for agriculture in the Central Valley. And precipitation is doing great. We're at about 150% of normal here in San Diego, just over that in Los Angeles, and about 140% of normal in San Francisco. Some of the cities are well above that throughout the state, so we really are looking good. And if you're wondering why you haven't heard any official declaration from the governor or anyone else that the drought is over, you're not the only ones. We're getting more and more calls from Helix customers asking that same question. And the reason, at this point anyways, the reason for that is that the State Water Resources Control Board, which has been managing the state's drought response, is really insisting that we not just bring our reservoirs and our rivers and lakes up to pre-drought levels, which we've done, but that we also bring up our groundwater supply, our aquifers, back to that level. And they were severely depleted throughout this last 6 years as agriculture was not able to get the water they wanted from rivers and reservoirs, so they began pumping groundwater and did some very severe pumping. And it's going to take many years to restore our aquifers to where they were. So I don't expect the Water Board's definition to last. I expect probably in April, at the end of the rainy season, we'll get a big announcement from the governor. We're hoping so anyways. So a little perspective on this drought. Water suppliers for years had a rule of thumb that California always had at least one wet year in every 5. And that served us well, because throughout the last 100 years, there's been about, I think, 11 multi-year droughts in California. One just barely surpassed 5 years. The others were anywhere from 2 to 5 years. And so there was some data behind that rule of thumb. But not anymore. You don't hear that rule referenced at all, and I haven't heard it in years. And that's because things have really changed. In 1999, the Colorado River went into drought, the Colorado River Basin, and 18 years later, it's still in drought, 18 consecutive years. And around 2005, and then again in 2007, people from the researchers from the University of Colorado, some other universities, did tree ring studies in the Colorado River Basin, some of the oldest trees, the bristlecone pines. And we were able to look not just at 100 years of river flow data, which the water industry had, but we were able to look about 1,000 years back into history and see that we've had droughts of 50 years in the Colorado River Basin before. So that really changed our perspective. We're really understanding, based on research done during the last 6 years, the role of temperature in drought. While precipitation really causes the drought, temperature really causes the severity of the drought. And that is because temperature really drives water demand. So as temperatures warm up, so does the demand, the water needs of crops and forests and street trees and urban landscapes. So we've learned quite a bit about that over this last 6 years. And temperature matters. 2014 was documented at the time as the warmest year ever recorded on the planet until 2015 came along, and that was the new warmest year ever recorded on the planet. And just in January, NASA and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration announced that 2016 was the warmest year ever recorded on the planet. And this is resonating with water managers and elected officials up in Sacramento, because if you look at the drought studies that predict where we're going in California over the next few decades, we're looking at a 3.5 to 5 degree temperature increase, average temperature increase over the next 50 to 75 years. And we're also looking at about the same amount of precipitation, but a lot more rain and a lot less snow because of the warming temperatures. And we're also looking at very extreme drought cycles and very extreme wet cycles like we're experiencing this year. As we go into drought or out of drought, we're going to get this very severe weather. And you can see, based on where we were the last 6 years and what we're experiencing this year, why, for the first time, we're not looking at drought as this one-time event. We're really looking, I think, this year, this last few years, as drought as a preview of what climate change is maybe bringing to the state of California. And that's what's driving legislation and water policy. And so I want to walk you now through where we are with legislation. Last spring, Governor Brown ordered the State Water Resources Control Board to transition out of temporary emergency drought regulations and transition into kind of a permanent framework, regulatory framework for water conservation. The framework is called Making Conservation a Way of Life in California. It has a nice name, but it brings with it a lot of change. The basic mandate is that water suppliers, the 408 or so water suppliers serving California cities, that we save a lot more water than we were mandated to save by a 2009 law that required us to reduce water use 20% by 2020. We surpassed that mandate here during the last 6 years. So now we're looking for a much deeper target, a deeper cut in our urban water use. So this permanent framework, what it does is it enacts water budgets for water agencies. And you guys are probably used to on your multifamily properties or your commercial properties having a landscape water budget where you're required to, hit a certain target with your water use, and we set the rate to incentivize you to hit that target, and we penalize you if you go over that target. What the state is proposing is that water agencies have that same kind of setup, and that that enforcement from the state will enforce that new setup, and that the water budget for each agency will be based on our regional climate and our population and our average property sizes. And the state considers this a big improvement because during the drought, San Francisco and San Diego were both under the same requirements as were every other city, regardless of average lot size or temperature differences. And I guess in that sense it is a big improvement. But it'll be based on targets that we are then going to be asking our customers to meet. The standard that the state is proposing for indoor water use will start at 55 gallons per capita per day, per person per day. That's not a reach. I think most of you are probably at about that level now. That's just indoor water use. But they believe we can get down to 49 gallons per person per day by 2030, and maybe 46 or lower gallons per person per day by 2040. And the way this framework is set up is that they will kind of continue to ratchet down the standards as we move forward through the years. If we look at outdoor water use, not a big change to start with. You guys are already managing your multifamily and your commercial properties to a water budget of 55% of the water that cool season turf needs, and that's where, at 45% of the water that cool season turf needs, and that's where this new framework will start, and it'll start at 55% of the water that cool season turf needs for single-family home properties. And then on the commercial side, does Castle Breckenridge manage commercial properties as well?
Some, yes.
Okay. The new requirement, it'll be separate water meters for irrigation. So this will be a new requirement for commercial properties, as well as water audits that the water suppliers would perform, and/or a water management plan for the business. So that's new, and we've really tried to kind of stay out of the business of the businesses and stay away from jobs in the economy in our restrictions to date. Now, the time frame for these new requirements, it really started last year. In November, the State Water Resource Control Board issued a draft framework, and it's a report that you can find if you Google water conservation as a way of life. It's about a 72-page report that outlines these new requirements. And they had a time for public comment. They were supposed to release the final framework on February 8th. And I don't know if you remember quite where we were with the weather, but on February 8th, we were going through a sequence of severe storms in both northern and southern California, and the week after as well. And I think everything was called off at that point. There's not a good time to introduce these severe conservation regulations. So again, we're looking probably for a policy to come out in April. In 2018, what's going to happen between then and next year is that the state is probably going to use IBM's Watson computer and satellites to measure all the irrigated or irrigable, and this is one of the kind of the argument points in this legislation is they're going to measure our landscape, and whether they measure what we're irrigating now or what we could irrigate if water conditions were a little better is still a discussion point. But they're going to give water suppliers our landscape data in 2018, and they're going to set the interim standards for indoor and outdoor water use. So whether they stay at that 55 gallons per capita per day or go lower, we'll see. In 2020, just a few years out, they're going to adopt the final indoor and outdoor water use standards that we all have to comply with by 2025. And then every 5 years thereafter, they will ratchet down the requirements for both indoor and outdoor water use. So we're really moving into something new, something a little more serious than where we've been in the past. Now, the State Water Resources Control Board does not have the authority to enact these new water use standards because most of the standards in place are from legislative action. So they're going to need legislative authority to do this. So 13 bills were introduced before I think it was the February 20th deadline for the 2017 legislative session. 11 of these are the spot bills, the placeholders that are waiting, the regulatory language, and then they will carry it forward through the legislature to bring that authority that's needed to enact it. There is one bill that's of great concern to us, and if you don't know about it already, it's called Assembly Bill 1667. It goes beyond the requirements of this new regulatory framework to require separate water meters, not just for commercial properties, but for multifamily properties. And it has a very quick deadline. It wants separate irrigation meters in all multifamily properties by January 1st, 2020, if the property has over 1,000 feet of landscaping, and 2025 if the property has only over 500 square feet of landscaping. So a very low threshold, lower than any of the legal framework for irrigation and landscaping that we've seen in the past.
Yeah.
There's another law that's already on the books and has been since 2009. It's Senate Bill 407. This was the law that required water efficient upgrades to all the plumbing fixtures in a property at time of sale or time of renovation, if a building permit was pulled. It has, basically no one's been talking about Senate Bill 407 throughout this drought, but on January 1st was the deadline for all single-family homes to upgrade to water-efficient fixtures, and January 1st, 2019 is the deadline for all multifamily properties and all commercial properties to upgrade to water-efficient fixtures. And so we can expect, even though we haven't heard much about this, and maybe we haven't heard much about this because there wasn't any enforcement teeth written into Senate Bill 407. So everyone's, I think, maybe just kind of pushed it aside while we dealt with the drought. But I think we can expect the new legislation that brings forward the new Water Conservation as a Way of Life framework to incorporate Senate Bill 407's requirements. So we'll include that as well. So if we look at the impacts on Castle Breckenridge and other property management companies, issue number one is finding out per property if your irrigation is already isolated or if it tees off your service line to your buildings. And this is not something your water agencies will likely know. It's not necessarily in blueprints. It might have come after You know, the project was approved and built. You might not have a record of it, don't know, but you may need, because of these two options here, to hire a landscape contractor to dig around your property and figure it out. So that's, this is terrible, but this is expense number one that I think you're looking at from this new legislation. Issue number two, replumbing your properties for a separate irrigation meter. These meters will be teed off the water main in the middle of the street, so a whole new setup. The changing of the existing pipes if that's needed, but certainly the installation of the new pipes will alter landscape, you know, affect your landscape, but those pipes will also likely run under sidewalks, possibly under parking lots, possibly under hardscape. So again, that's the next issue. And issue number three is the cost of the new meter. The meter itself and the installation by the water agency, not a big deal, usually about $200 for a meter and about $100 for the installation, the big hole we make in the street, connecting it to the water main. What is a big deal is something called capacity fees, and I don't know if you're familiar with those, but when you connect a new meter to a water system, you connect it to the water system all the way to Northern California and to the Colorado River. A capacity fee is kind of you're buying into the system that's been built over 100 years by Helix Water District, San Diego County Water Authority, Metropolitan Water District to bring water to whatever neighborhood you're in here in San Diego County. And so a capacity fee for an irrigation meter can run around $15,000 per meter. That's a huge expense. So,
Ouch.
yeah. And issue number four, of course, are the indoor retrofits required by Senate Bill 407 if that ends up being a requirement. So that said, I just presented you with a potentially huge bill related to new legislation in the few years ahead. You should know that at Helix Water District, we're not a fan of separate irrigation meters by themselves because we don't think they accomplish water conservation by themselves. What accomplishes water conservation in a landscape is a water budget and a matching rate structure that encourages and incentivizes conservation. And SB 1667, the law that's going to requiring the bill that's requiring the separate water meters does not include language mandating water budgets. So we're certainly opposed to 1667 at this point. My recommendation is that is to lobby. Helix Water District and the other water districts in San Diego County, kind of led and in coordination with the San Diego County Water Authority, have been lobbying really hard throughout this drought since the governor issued the 25% mandatory statewide cutback in June of 2014 or June of 2015. Our feeling was that the state was not recognizing all the work we've done in San Diego County over the last about 25 years. San Diegans have reduced their water use by 40%.
Wow.
40%.
Wow.
And through your water rates, we all have invested about $3.5 billion in new water resources, and that includes anything from the water trade deal with Imperial Valley for senior water rights to the Colorado River, or the desalination plant that went online 2 years ago last year in Carlsbad, or the new reservoirs, Levenheim Reservoir, the reservoir expansion at San Vicente Reservoir. We've done a lot of work with that $3.5 billion, and we didn't think that the way the regulations have been written the last 6 years, it didn't take any of that work, that long-term work, into account. So we've been lobbying very hard. There's one bill that I didn't mention, and it's AB 1323. It was introduced by Shirley Weber, who represents us in the Assembly, represents Lemon Grove and parts of San Diego. Helix met with Assemblywoman Weber twice, and the Water Authority worked with her, kind of unbeknownst to the other agencies, multiple meetings, and is sponsoring her bill, AB 1323. And what she is requiring in her bill is that the State Water Resources Control Board form a committee, a working group with local water agencies and regional water agencies to kind of relook at and redevelop this long-term framework with the retail perspective, the local perspective in mind. This week we're meeting with Pottery Dam, Helix, and Valley Center Water Districts are meeting with Eduardo Garcia, who's the chair of the Water, Parks, and Wildlife Committee in the legislature. And I kind of take back to the Carlsbad plant, the lobbying that was done by the business community, the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce and a number of individual businesses played a huge role in securing the approval of the Carlsbad plant. And we sent out, I believe, a letter to all the businesses in Helix's service area in November during the public comment period for the draft regulations for this framework. And I don't know how many businesses did send anything to Sacramento, but I would sure encourage you and through your association in Sacramento to ramp up whatever activities you're doing now, because this is a big impact on your industry. And again, we're into water budgets and not into these separate meters by themselves for producing the water savings that the state is looking for. If you have any questions about, I'm sure you guys know how to reach your elected officials, but if you don't, we have a page on our website, legislative advocacy page, where we have the contact information for all of our representatives.
Take a few questions.
Yeah.
I have one. I got a letter on behalf of one of my office buildings here in La Mesa last year indicating that there was a peak usage rate for water from the Helix Water District, or that's the way I interpret that. Is that true? Is there a rate structure change if you're using more water in the middle of the day than if you're using it in the evening?
We didn't have water restrictions based on time of day for indoor water use.
Okay.
So most of our landscapes are on
Yeah.
water budgets, but that would be a bit of a mystery, but I'd be happy to look that up for you and see if we can get a more clear answer for you.
How about rebates? You didn't mention anything about rebates through the water district.
Yeah, most of the rebates that we featured over the last 5 years, most of them are still available. All the retrofits that we've mentioned here, the indoor retrofits, toilet rebates, faucet rebates, shower head rebates, are available and will be for quite some time. Those are really still the backbone of the rebates that we do. Rebates on outdoor retrofits, more efficient sprinkler heads, rotary nozzles, drip irrigation, smart irrigation controllers that are based on daily weather. Yeah.
Where can we get more information on those?
SoCalWatersmart.com is the place to go for information on rebates.
Say that again, Mike.
SoCal, S-O-C-A-L, watersmart.com. And this is Metropolitan Water District of Southern California's website for the rebates.
Okay, another question over here. Deborah.
How are all the regulations going to affect master metered communities, specifically mobile home parks?
Interesting. I don't think that's a tough question. I think you're going to be okay on the indoor side. You're just going to have to again separate out your landscape use.
Okay, irrigation,
Yeah.
just like the other common interest development.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Harold.
Has there been discussion on increasing the use of reclaimed water?
There has been. Here in San Diego County, we're actually pretty far ahead most of the state. Not just recycled water for landscape use. We're really kind of moving now towards landscape water as to augment the drinking water supply. Based on what we've been doing in Orange County now for years, they recycle all of their wastewater, purify it into basically distilled water, and put it back into the aquifer underneath Orange County for about 6 months, bring it up, treat it, and it's part of the water supply. And they save a lot of money and not importing water from Northern California and the Colorado River in doing that. So I believe it's around 2030 or 2035, the City of San Diego's Pure Water program is supposed to come online, where they're doing the exact same program, purifying recycled water, putting it in San Vicente Reservoir, and then bringing it back into the water supply. And also Padre Dam Water District now, and Helix is one of the partners with Padre Dam, as are some of the East County cities, is looking to do the same thing on a somewhat smaller scale to recycle the wastewater here from East County into recycled water, purify that, and then turn that into drinking water. So we're going there. It's pretty interesting. Wouldn't have been acceptable maybe 15 years ago. You can look at the public outreach that's done annually by the San Diego County Water Authority, and the acceptance of recycled water, purified recycled water as drinking water supply has gone up every year. And then this last 6 years has really driven acceptance.
Mike, has the new desal plant in Carlsbad made a significant impact on water supply in San Diego County?
I think it has in two ways. At peak capacity of 50 million gallons a day, it's just about 8% of the county's water demand, water supply. But it's made another impact in that it's operated flawlessly over its first, at this point, 60-some plus weeks since opening. And so that's given encouragement to the dozen or so other desalination projects that are in some stage of planning along the California coast. I don't know if you've read, but projects are in planning for, there's a retrofit of the San Onofre nuclear plant that could become a solar-powered desalination plant.
Wow.
There are plans for a plant either down in Ensenada or Rosarita, or perhaps over on the Gulf of California side that would provide desalinated water to Uhrhamer Water District, the San Diego County Water Authority, state of Arizona, as well as Mexico. So there's a lot of work on the desalination side going on.
I have another question that I'm a jogger. I jog every morning early, and I even jog when it rains, sometimes to my own detriment. And I've noticed, this is common sense, that there's a tremendous amount of water runoff everywhere when it rains. Sometimes it's also destructive. It hurts property.
Yeah.
And I've been wondering for a long time, years now, why people who are in water conservation and water engineering haven't given more serious thought to how to capture this runoff water and put it somewhere until we need it. That's my question to you. I don't know if there's an answer to that,
Actually, there is.
but I see that every time it rains.
I notice it when I get off at the Fletcher Drive exit right down here, and you see your raging river during the rainstorms.
Exactly, right.
Yeah, and it's
Raging river, that's
remarkable
what it is.
how much it is. The city that's really leading the way in this, the reason I think that stormwater as water supply has been delayed is because stormwater has been treated as a water pollution issue and not as a water supply resource. It's not managed by your water agencies or your wastewater agencies. It's managed by your cities and separately. But where your big cities are where you have water pollution, wastewater, and drinking water all under the same roof. And so that's where the innovative where the topic is moving forward. And the City of Los Angeles really is taking this forward. They determined about 10 years ago that they had somewhere around 3 billion gallons of water flowing into the Los Angeles River on days that it was not raining, just from overflow from irrigation over and other sources, car washing and whatever else under such a large land area.
Oh my.
So they're really taking a hard look at capturing stormwater through redesigning the city, making parks bowl-shaped so that they capture that stormwater and infiltrate it into the aquifers under the city, replacing the sides of all residential streets with what are called bioswales, and we're putting these in San Diego County now as well, with drought-tolerant landscape and some shade trees, but again, they capture the stormwater and prevent the runoff into the creeks and basically into the ocean. So they're leading the way. I expect smaller agencies to follow. San Francisco is also leading the way. They introduced building ordinances over the last few years based on the development of their own headquarters building for the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. It's about I think it's like a 13-story building, but it uses 40% of the water that a comparable building uses because they capture the rainwater that lands on the roof, the stormwater that lands on the property outside, the seep water from groundwater that comes into the basement. I don't know if you guys deal with that in any of your properties. But they also recycle the toilet water with a small natural treatment plant in the basement and in the garden on the outside exterior of the building. Kind of a natural treatment process, and that water just goes around and around within the building. And they're now requiring that because it works so well in their own building. They're requiring that now for all building projects in the city. So there is progress being made. We are moving the ball forward.
Any other questions? All right, let's give a big hand for Mike.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, there may be some individuals here that would like to speak to you one-on-one about various specific questions about the water district and what you can do for our clients. We manage about 80 homeowner associations, roughly 8,000 units, and
Yeah.
one of the biggest line items is landscaping and irrigation. And we know better than anybody else except you that there's real inflation in utilities, especially for homeowners associations, because so many things are paid in common. You mentioned the meters as one. That's water, sewer, electric, gas for heating. These are all paid in common. Even trash, when during when the price of gasoline and diesel spiked, they were having huge surcharges on our. So they didn't raise the fee for the trash service, but they put on these big fees for hauling it.
Yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah, surcharges.
Big surcharges.
Some of them haven't fallen off yet.
Yeah. So we deal with real inflation for our budgets for these homeowners associations. Water is always a big one.
Yeah.
So we're always looking for opportunities to help conserve water and economically save dollars. Because it seems like a real motivation. They kind of go together
Oh,
anyway.
yeah.
Yeah.
We're in a couple HOAs where we used to live out in Palm Desert, and we have a place in Solana Beach, and water is always usually at the top of the budget, top of the monthly expenses.